Jason Dell. I am the Security Practice Manager for Network Solutions, and we have a lot to talk about today, so let's go ahead and get started. We will start out with a bit of a review of current technologies and current Cisco technologies and products, and then we'll go right into a presentation of a couple of new and exciting innovations that were discussed at Cisco Live this year. So before we get started, I want you to go through an exercise with me. So put on your CEO hat. Think like your CEO or top management for just a couple of minutes, and think like they think, if you can. And I want you to identify the assets that are important to your company. Okay, I'll give a couple of examples, but you write down what you think is important to your company. Okay, so some examples are intellectual property, customer account information, employee information. If you're in healthcare, patient information, or if you're in finance or in retail, cardholder information. So those are the assets, the type of assets we're identifying here. And now I want you to identify the risks to these assets. Again, to your particular assets, I'll give some generic examples, and you jot down or think about the risks to these assets. The one that comes to mind for me is theft, or corruption, or image. And what I mean by image is reputation. What happens to your company's image or reputation if these assets are compromised? What if it gets out to the media and to your customers that your company's been compromised, and all this confidential information is now out there in the open? What sort of confidence will your customers have in your company? What are the risks to that? Are your customers going to stop doing business with you? Will you have difficulty obtaining new customers? What are the costs for remediation? Those are your risks. Now, identify, you can take off your CEO hat now and wear the hat or hats that you normally wear. And now identify the controls that mitigate the risks to these assets. So again, these are specific to your company. I'll give some generic examples. Web security, email security, firewall, and antivirus. Okay, those can be examples of some of the controls that you have in place. Now evaluate the efficacy of these controls. So let's say your web security solution, we'll start on a positive note and say that you're pretty satisfied with your web security solution. You think it does a good job. So we can, evaluate that one as good. Your email security, though, you're not sure. You got a couple of instances of ransomware last year, and you're pretty sure that the ransomware probably came through email. So that one you can say is insufficient. Then your firewall is an old firewall, maybe just a stateful firewall, and maybe it's at end of life and needs to be replaced. So we'll mark that one as poor. And your antivirus is just a point-in-time antivirus, the same type of antivirus that other customers that are commonly advertised out there. It just really has a list of what's bad and dropped, and then it lets through anything that's not marked as bad, and then it looks at it again. That's not really sufficient in today's day and age, so we'll count that one as insufficient. Now look back to your assets, and with all this in mind, evaluate how many remaining risks do you have. If all you had was a good, strong web security solution, but these other technologies were insufficient, we haven't even talked about access control or intrusion prevention, insider threats, or cloud security. So really, all of your assets are still at a good amount of risk. Have this discussion with your upper management and top management so they can agree with you on what your assets are and what these risks are. It can help you when you go to them with a proposal for security solution to justify, you're not just coming to them with a big purchase request and they say, why do I need to pay for this? I don't understand. Don't we already have web security? Don't we have antivirus? Don't we already have a firewall? We're protected, right? We don't need to invest in all this. So if you break it right down to assets and risks and what can happen if they choose not to go for your proposal, then it's not just on you. They've taken some ownership in this as well. Okay, so today's threat methodologies: malware, SQL injection, session hijacking, botnets, ransomware, advanced persistent threats. I didn't want to add any more to this list because I'll sound like an auctioneer and because the font would be too small to fit on this slide. Just know that threats are constantly evolving, constantly changing. Your security system cannot be static. It needs to be able to keep up with these dynamic changes. Consider all of your security components as part of a security system. They need to work together, pass contextual information back and forth to each other to work as an efficient security system rather than just individual components. So we'll cover some common security methodologies. Email security. Email and web commonly are listed as the top 2 threat vectors on various lists. Email is the top way of obtaining ransomware. So it's also a methodology that's not talked about enough nowadays. I think it's just kind of breezed over as just, well, it keeps away spam. We need to take the time to talk about email security and what it is you're protecting against and how efficient it is and how effective it is at doing that. Security is more than just categories. That's more of an HR thing, your static categories that block people from going places they shouldn't be going to. It's also, does it control if your employees are trying to access either voluntarily or involuntarily a malicious infrastructure to download malware or maybe to download a private key to encrypt their file system like ransomware should do. It's more than just category-based. Internet edge security, now we're talking about your firewalls. Before in our example, I said you had just a stateful firewall. Stateful firewall just looks at IP addresses and protocols. That's pretty much it. That doesn't really cut it nowadays. Next generation firewalls utilize deep packet inspection to give you application visibility and control. This gives you a deeper visibility into what traffic actually goes across into and out of your network via the internet edge. If somebody were to ask you today, what sort of applications are you doing over the internet, do you know? You can only protect what you can see. Access control can be very broadly summarized as who and what are you, and here's where you're permitted to go to, and here's where you have been. It's important. That pertains to wired, wireless, and VPN. Anomaly detection is a technology that will watch your network traffic throughout your network, make a baseline of acceptable traffic, and then notify you of anomalous traffic. For example, if a workstation in your marketing department is suddenly doing a port scan or a vulnerability scan, that's anomalous traffic and then needs to be alerted and looked into further. And then finally, cloud security. More and more applications are going into the cloud. Cloud security is, pays attention to what sort of activities are going on in your cloud applications, and is it the activities that you are intending that that application to do? Is it storing information you didn't intend for it to store? Maybe confidential information, account information is not supposed to be stored in the cloud. That's what cloud security is pertaining to. The Cisco attack continuum, this is a model that Cisco's been using for some time, and they tend to match all of their solutions and products to this model. The idea is that it's very best to control in the before phase to prevent compromise from happening, but it also watches during. If there's something that gets through your defenses, it can catch attacks in the act and do something about it. And the after phase is unique to Cisco in that, Cisco are admitting that no threat solution, no security solution is going to be 100%. It's not going to remove the threat. It's only going to mitigate your threat. So what happens when an attack makes it through and it's in your network and it's actively attacking and you catch it? What do you do about it? So how widespread is it? That's the scope. And then how do you stop it from spreading? That's the contain. And then how do you finally remediate it? And by the way, after the after phase properly communicates back to the before phase to re-harden your perimeter defenses so that the attack cannot happen again. These technologies applied to your network infrastructure, your servers and workstations being your endpoints, your mobile devices, your virtual infrastructure, and your cloud applications. So the security solution, the Cisco security solutions that match the technologies from a couple of slides ago. For email, I lead with cloud email security. The Ironport email security appliance is still a very viable application. If you were to take that and virtualize it and put it in the cloud, that's cloud email security. The benefit of that is you don't have to manage the hardware, patch the application. That's all managed by Cisco. You just use it as a service. And important thing about this is to know that it can also have, you can add a license in for advanced malware protection to allow you for continuous file analysis and retrospection, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. That's very powerful. For web security, Umbrella and the Ironport Web Security Appliance is still viable as well. I usually lead with Umbrella because Umbrella protects not just web applications. It protects all applications that utilize DNS that access the internet. So that's not just web protocols. That's much greater than that. It does include web security, but it's much more than that. And it's very effective at mitigating ransomware and other malware. And I add in here also next generation firewall. It has some capability for URL filtering. I would not leave that off your next generation firewall. It allows you to have some greater visibility as to what goes on your internet edge. And, we talked a bit about next generation firewall and how it compares to stateful firewall. Important to note that it needs to tie into a reputable threat intelligence. Cisco's Talos threat intelligence database sees more than 3 times the traffic that Google does every day, and several of their security solutions tie into Talos, including cloud email security, Ironport, Umbrella, and AMP for endpoints, and many more. Endpoint security is more than just antivirus. Your point-in-time antivirus is just going to basically evaluate a file and determine whether it's on the bad list and drop it. If it's not on the bad list, it sends it through as unknown and it never looks at it again. So if later that file polymorphs into a malicious file, you'll never know where that file came from, and you won't know how widespread it is. And for endpoints does continuous file analysis and tracking of all of these files, including whether they're renamed or whether they spawn other files. So if a file later changes disposition and does start behaving maliciously, that you know on every endpoint where it's installed and has the ability to remediate it as well. So that's called retrospection, where you can go through and say, well, this file came through originally, we didn't think it was malicious. Now we know it is malicious. Let's sort of turn back to time, find that file, even if it's at rest, and quarantine it. No other endpoint protection software does that. Access control, again, that's who and what are you, where are you allowed to go to, and where have you been. That's Cisco ICE, that's the integrated, I lost the acronym, ISE, help me out here, Nicole. Identity Services Engine, sorry about that. So that's the Identity Services Engine. It's more than just radius. It passes contextual security information, and it's core to some upcoming technologies, which we'll discuss here shortly. And Cisco's anomaly detection solution is called Stealth Watch. It again watches for anomalous traffic, and we'll talk about that here in the next slide. And finally, cloud security is done with cloud access security brokers technology, and the product's called CloudLock, and it does some of the things that we talked about previously. So real quick before I pass the ball to Nicole, I want to talk about 2 things. Network as a sensor. That's Cisco Stealth Watch, and that utilizes your current network infrastructure investments. Instead of having to do a forklift replace of all of your network infrastructure, it can use many of the equipment that you already have installed and use NetFlow to increase visibility and watch for network anomalies and notifies of threats. This is going to be a key component to some other security products coming down the road, which we'll talk about shortly. And network as an enforcer along those same lines, Cisco's Identity Services Engine can again utilize your current network infrastructure investments to control access to your network, whether wired or wireless, or over VPN, and enforce this network policy. we'll talk a bit more about that one and where it fits in here shortly as well. Okay, and with that, Nicole, I will pass the ball to you.
Thanks for the time. I'm Nicole, and I'm with Cisco. So first of all, just so for everyone else listening, Cisco Live is our annual conference that Cisco has where we really usually release a lot of hot technologies, and that's something really cool that Network Solutions is doing by having me join today. I'm going to try to point those out, but it's no secret because Cisco Live is available at ciscolive.com, and we do offer a lot of free recordings and trainings on there from the event. So we capture all that. So we had about 27,000 people this year in Vegas with us. And that's the one I'm going to give you a few highlights on. We had a very exciting announcement this year. I've been with Cisco over 11 years, and this year was a pretty cool year for some of the stuff we're doing, but more or less for the industry as we start to simplify some of the stuff that we've spent many years doing the same way. All right, so again, if you wanted to bookmark that or check it out, ciscolive.com. But what I'm going to do is kind of share with you a couple of key things that came out of it and really talk about what they're calling the new era of networking and really figure out what that means to you beyond marketing. I was shocked a few years ago when Tim Cook from Apple showed up on stage at one of our internal events, and I'm an Apple fangirl, and I know some people have all kinds of opinions, but I happen to like Apple. And I was really geeked when Cisco first announced the partnership with Apple. And now we're really starting to see that take off, not just in some of the stuff we're already doing with Fastlane and application priority with wireless and on that side of the house with our apps, but he came on stage during Cisco Live this year and talked about a new security connector application. So this is kind of an overview of that. It's going to be released this fall. So Cisco Live is very much a sneak peek to things. So there's a few things that I'm going to talk about or reference today that are, you guys will be ahead of the curve. So they'll be released this fall, but it's really good. I'm going to present these technologies and then give you a nugget to think about. So with this, iOS can sometimes be harder to secure due to the nature of the platform. So the fact that they're going to work with Cisco and create a security connector is really great, and you'll see it integrate with Umbrella, which it was a solution that Jason referenced earlier, and really be able to intercept those DNS requests and make sure they're secure from anywhere, and our MDM. And that also comes from some of the things I think Meraki does well. Meraki has a great mobile app, if you haven't ever seen that. And some of that functionality that the Meraki mobile app offers is being able to see things about the connection and the network, and those type of integrations with the visibility of what's happening on the network for the enterprise to see where people are going and have a little more control on iOS devices is something really exciting about this connector. So I wanted to share that with you guys. So one of the next other big things that I thought was cool, and this is with a focus on security, my favorite thing from all of Cisco Live and Cisco right now is actually the Spark boards, but that's not the topic of today. But I'm incredibly geeked as a adjunct professor and teacher and a whiteboard fangirl that we have digital whiteboards. So any of you who might have use for that and use Cisco collaboration, they're pretty cool. But I digress. So this next announcement, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the new switches here that are referenced, but on this new switch line, we're pairing the use of NetFlow, again, 9 rate on those switches, with StealthWatch and machine learning. So what does this really mean, right? We're using the hardware that's capable of capturing net flows and passing that to a machine, because if we look at traffic analysis, there's a lot of traffic on your network. So knowing what to look for and how to crunch it and to make it something meaningful for you and have analytics is a big part of what StealthWatch does. Well, one challenge that you may have is how do you secure yourself against connected traffic on your network, because it's in a tunnel. So the decryption process, for those of you that have looked into it, it's very process intensive, expensive, and also there's a little bit of ethical questions because, for example, if an employee is just on an encrypted tunnel into their bank, there's all kinds of things you want to consider there, from the 8th layer of the OSI model, the political layer. which I like to reference. But the encrypted traffic analytics really allows us to look into encrypted traffic without encrypting it, understand the policy that you have, and detect threats. And that is so exciting because we have about a 99% accuracy rate, and what we're doing is looking at the metadata and the patterns, and then comparing it with this large database that Jason mentioned called Talos, where we're able to see security threats from all over the network. So this capability is very cool, and with that, I'll say, what is your policy on encrypted traffic? This session is so great just to level set and have you reflect on what are you doing about this traffic. Like if you have iDevices, what are you doing for security there? If you have encrypted traffic on your network, or how do you secure yourself against these kind of threats that could be landing in your network and then tunneling out of your network? Because hackers, they might want to get in and not have a tunnel because they have to work their way to a vulnerability or attack surface to kind of get their way in, or backdoor. But from there, how do you deal with that traffic? And what I want to take away from this whole Stealth Watch piece is just how do you address attacks like command and control, like data exfiltration. As I work with partners and customers in the security realm, I find you'll take the list of solutions that Jason explained today, and you'll try to figure out what problems they're solving, and then you kind of prioritize which ones are most important, which problems have the most risk, and you create your security strategy. And I often find that the command and control, the data exfiltration, those things are harder to find with traditional firewalls. And that's the biggest thing that I'm seeing shift in the security world, is really the investment Cisco's made from being a firewall company and evolving with many acquisitions, very strong acquisitions in security. So I think over the next few years, there's going to be some really good stuff coming. And a lot of that will be actually folded into something called software-defined access. This is the biggest announcement from Cisco Live. For those of you there, you're probably smiling, and hopefully I'll give you a new perspective or another way to be geeked out about it, because I'm very excited about it, and I want to share with you what it means. Now, many of you may have heard of application-centric infrastructure in the data center and the ability to abstract policy via something called a contract, where you can dictate the types of things you need to spin up applications. We've extracted hardware from software on UCS and with hypervisors, and we do it with wireless controllers. So we're doing it in the data center. We're doing it with wireless controllers, as we've done for a very long time. I remember the days of actually figuring out where that breakpoint was for moving to an autonomous AP to a controller, and now we're doing it on the access layer. So this is why it's been a long time coming. Prime has had some good capabilities to get into the access layer, but it's had limitations. And so we find that by taking this more open, programmable standpoint, we have a lot of flexible ways that you can manage the LAN. And then through that, since we can manage wireless with this box and manage software-defined access with this box, we basically are able to take all of these managers like ICE and make it simple. So Cisco's doing something to try to simplify it with this play, and you'll hear that called digital network architecture. It's basically re-looking at it and saying, man, there's a lot of moving parts. Security alone has like 8 or 10 at least, and how are we managing that across the network? So this is really the great way to think about it. We used to build networks for voice, video, and data, and we would have quality of service, and we would make sure we had the types of prioritization, segmentation, and structure for those packets to traverse and have the right latency and right properties. But today we have a whole nother set of challenges that were not as much a part of the design of the entire network infrastructure when Cisco started, right? So now we have security, and it is becoming a bit hard because you're starting to have to create such a long list of security things to do, but you have to do that. You have to be secure in your email. You have to be secure on the web. I mean, all of them are important, but how can we build a network that takes that into consideration? Security policy, as you'll see, is the fundamental piece of what we're doing with a software-defined network. So beyond just pushing configurations and IP addressing and image management and the basics of standing up access infrastructure, we do want to enable it with security out of the gate and make it easier for you as a customer. All right, and of course, cloud, IoT, mobility. I don't know how many of you have machines on your network, but there is quite a large conversion, depending on your vertical, with machines and high throughput new devices joining your network that you also want to have different levels of security with. So that's what Cisco's doing. This was the big announcement at Cisco Live. Software-defined access is this controller model of these switches. We are allowing that for some legacy switches as well, and then even if you just wanted to hack away at some APIs, you can even do that. So we have all kinds of tiers, and the challenges that we think that helps you face is all the difficulties of segmentation that we talk about with security and VLANs, and just simplifying the segmentation, taking the LDAP group model and putting that into place on your network. And it's complex to configure. You have large networks, you may have branch offices. There's all of these things. We should have an easier way to, one, eliminate human error. I know I've gone in on some networks and made a hole in something and maybe got it to work and forgot to save a config or fat-fingered something. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't have one way to simplify configuration. We've done it the same way for so long, and that's some of the exciting changes. And then just being able to use that machine learning and the types of things that we're seeing trends in the technology space to resolve issues faster. Hey, we see this port flagging. Let's present it to you in a pretty GUI, right? And then you can just click and resolve. And that's the type of things we're seeing with the network. And we are making the hardware to back it up. So within this model of software-defined access, there's three main pieces. One is that policy piece, and that really is that identity-based contextual information. Who are you at? If I say Nicole went to a website, well, cool, I can do that for work. I go to websites all day. But if I say Nicole went to a website at 3:30 a.m. that was in China on a proxy, using a different account on her computer, I mean, all of a sudden, that context, Nicole went on the website, cool. Those other things, maybe not cool, right? Maybe you want to flag that for IT. So by having that identity and then having that be similar to, say, coming into a nightclub, you have the bouncer stop you. That's like ICE. He'll stop you. He'll tag you with a VIP wristband or underage or overage. They use that when you're in the club. They don't recard you in the club unless there's an anomaly and something fishy is going on. So it's that same thing. How can we use that tag and have ICE be the bouncer? And then when the user experience within the network is just based on that, great, you're this traffic, you're allowed to go here, you're not allowed to go here, just basic decisions based on a tag, based on the identity. And then automating that. What does automation mean? It means simplifying all these controllers into one. You want a new site, you know that every site needs these things, you put in the base profile, you create an IP pool, and you're ready to go. It's really just taking things that we've maybe spent more cycles doing in the past and giving us tools to do them faster, so that we can free up time to use some of the newer technology and data analytics that's going to be available to us. And this third piece over here of software-defined access is kind of sneak peek future stuff of Cisco Live, because coming this fall, we're going to be able to offer via NetFlow some more insights and telemetry into that user and application behavior. So stay tuned there, and you're going to see some good stuff that we even talked about today in play there. So those are the three main pieces. So how are you doing this today? And how can you use this to be simple? And I think where we're seeing this come into play is just the simplicity. And I'll give two quick examples. If you're bringing users online, you have users, you have devices, and you have apps. Then you just simply create groups of who should be talking to who. So before, you would have to create groups, put them onto a VLAN, make sure their IP addresses are correct, create the right access list so they can get to where they need to go, versus that being automated under the covers with Cisco and with our DNA Center, which is our manager of managers that really is the heart of all this. And so you go from having all of this before work and just really taking the benefits of automation and GUIs. So It's just going to be a new tool and new skill. So here's the pieces. As I mentioned, these are in that DNA center. That's our pane of glass. Especially in security, we have conversations around, well, how do I share that information from ICE to this information from Firepower Threat Center? And how do we, there's all of these questions we get about how do we exchange information. In the world of SIMS, which is a security management exchange platform, to present that, and some of the other technologies are just not as straightforward. So we want to be able to offer a manager for the key things that the network needs. It needs some type of security and access. You need to configure it, and you need to make sure it can stay up. And it's that process that we know everyone needs to make a secure network that we simplify with DNA Center across all these pieces of what will soon become a campus fabric. So we're really just changing a lot of the terminology and the technology that goes under that. For the real route and switch geeks out there, I encourage you to check out Campus Fabric and keep your eye on that as we develop more technology leadership there. And this just shows you, okay, what is Nicole talking about? She talked about ICE. What is ICE really doing? Hey, take a peek at this. On the right, you'll see the security policies, identifying the users, saying, oh, it's Nicole in my example earlier. Her device is a corporate-owned device. That means she can just come on our networks because we automate that on the back end because of the certain security checks we have, and then we sync it with other controllers. That's important in this new era. But the network controller stuff on the left is just as important. So discovering what's on your network, are things ready? What's your speeds if you're rolling out a new application, or being able to load those services as soon as possible. So it really is the types of things that turn on your car and then make it go fast. So ICE is like our nitrous tank. I'm not really into that racing, so that could be a horrible example, but it really gets it going because you add that push of knowing you can get there and turn up some things. This is just kind of showing that campus fabric. Different switches and routers will play different roles in this. It is using an underlying layer of VXLAN and Lisp to do this, and this is what I referenced earlier. And there's different nodes or roles that devices will play depending on the type of information they're storing or sharing. But the whole idea is this next group of switches, and here's a good list so some of you can see some of the past switches in routing and wireless. And these platforms pictured here, these things can all be leveraged through a software-defined access at some level. We can leverage some of these things to push policy, to make configuration image management easier, to optimize WAN links. We can do all of that stuff with these platforms today. So we announced a lot of the 9000 series. This is our next generation access switch. So the 3850 was the new 2960, and we've evolved. And so many of you who have been around Cisco for a long time, this is our next access switch. In the field, I kept getting questions from my partners and from my customers like, hey, when are you going to give us, we need a access switch update leading up to this. And they were wondering why it was taking so long for me to get back to them. And it was because we were developing this new switch that, like I said, can be managed with an app, can be managed with the app, managed apps, lots of options, lots of flexibility. And we're really starting to drive all of the stuff that we're talking about, whether it's security, identity, all of these things are driven through Cisco One. So when your account team or when you talk to Cisco is becoming a packaging company as far as packaging our software like a Microsoft. So Microsoft sells a suite of products. We need to do that to keep our features relevant, to keep them new and fresh, and that is what we're doing with Cisco One. So you'll see these things that we need for the network, the automation, the security, those will come in a Cisco One package that allows you to subscribe to that. And that way it's regardless of your hardware choice. And this, we are reducing some images, so it's a single image, containerized, so that it really does run with a programmable ASIC. So Not that you want to put Minecraft on any of your access switches, but technically you could. So I'm sure when I get to play around with these, our engineers will get creative and we'll see some stuff. But we've actually dedicated an entire developers area and network and community at DevNet. So those of you who might have programming, a passion for programming and networking, you'll feel right at home. And there's a lot of sandboxes and labs there where you could start to see some of the programmability. And I think the use cases are just going to grow. And that's the great thing about the software-defined access. You can use the tools that make it easier, the applications that make it easier, or it's just programmable via API, which is really great depending on what you're trying to do. This has a lot of great benefits. This is our new switch, so that's the sneak peek on that. And, you know, that's really all I had as far as bringing it together. I did want to say that there's two things that are happening that are really good, just to end off here. You know, one, Cisco has made all of these security acquisitions, and we're really strong in that area now. So I'm really excited to see where that's going to take us, and I really feel like we've made the right steps. And this DNA Center is going to be so cool. It is available for demo. If you wanted to reach out to Jason or the NSI team, I'm sure they could show that to you and kind of give you a sneak peek of what it looks like. And as far as everything that you've learned, if you're overwhelmed, I just can't say enough about NSI and their capabilities to work through this with you. It's hard to get a broad swath of security in 1 hour and also cover a new way of doing networking and new switches. But it was a pleasure to try to do so with you guys, and I just want to recommend them. And for myself, if you want to connect to me, I'm on Twitter at tech_Nicole, so it's like technical. But I do also recommend, if you're a Twitter follower, I'm kind of just Twitter promoting now, but I really do enjoy Network Solutions Twitter. If you're looking for the guy to add on that, I would add NSI Guy, and they do some great updates there. And I'm sure the team may want to add some other channels that you can connect, but I really enjoy reading a lot of the Cisco articles and things that they put out on their Twitter feed. So with that, I will kind of hand it back over to Jason, and I hope this was a good teaser for you guys, just to get you thinking about your security strategy, and then just reassure you that there's some really cool ways and new approaches. So if you're in a network refresh, or you're talking about trying to figure out how to make things simpler for your business, to give it a look and to make sure you stay secure, because we got to have security in this world. Thanks, Jason, and thanks, guys.